Have you ever felt like your mind was not entirely your own, as if invisible forces were pulling your thoughts in directions you never chose, making decisions that deep down you know are not truly yours? Tonight I want to share with you a discovery so powerful that it was deliberately hidden from the world for centuries. A mental discipline developed by one of Japan's most legendary figures that gives you complete mastery over your own consciousness and the ability to influence others in ways that seem almost supernatural. This is not about manipulation or cheap psychological tricks. This is about understanding the fundamental nature of human consciousness and learning to operate from a level of mental clarity and strategic thinking that most people will never experience in their entire lives. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the greatest military strategist in Japanese history, developed what I call the method of absolute mental sovereignty, a systematic approach to consciousness that allowed him to anticipate his enemies' moves, inspire unwavering loyalty in his followers, and make decisions with such clarity and precision that he seemed to possess an almost psychic understanding of human nature. But here's what's fascinating and deeply troubling about this discovery. The method was so effective at creating mental independence and strategic superiority that it was systematically suppressed by those in power. Because imagine what would happen if everyone possessed the ability to think with complete clarity, to see through deception instantly, and to make decisions based purely on wisdom rather than emotional manipulation. The ruling classes throughout history have always depended on keeping people mentally scattered, emotionally reactive, and dependent on external authorities for their thinking. So a method that creates complete mental sovereignty represents an existential threat to any system that relies on controlling people's minds. Before we dive deeper into this forbidden knowledge, I need you to do something right now that will help both you and others who are struggling with the same mental confusion and lack of clarity that you've been experiencing. In the comments below, share this exact phrase, "My mind feels scattered, and I'm ready to reclaim my mental sovereignty." Because when you write these words, you're making a public commitment to yourself and creating a space where others can find the courage to admit their own mental struggles. You see, one of the reasons this method has remained hidden is because people are ashamed to admit that they don't feel in complete control of their own thoughts, that they often feel like passengers in their own minds, rather than the drivers of their destiny. Your comment will give someone else the permission they need to begin their own journey toward mental freedom, and it will activate something powerful in your own consciousness by declaring your intention to the universe. This is not just about personal growth. This is about creating a community of people who refuse to live with scattered, reactive minds, and who are committed to developing the kind of mental clarity and strategic thinking that Yoshitsune possessed. So pause this video right now, write that phrase in the comments, and then come back, because what I'm about to share with you will fundamentally change how you understand the nature of consciousness and your own mental potential. Let me tell you about a moment that changed everything for Yoshitsune and led to the development of his forbidden method. It was during the Genpei War, and Yoshitsune was facing an impossible military situation, outnumbered, outgunned, with no apparent path to victory against the overwhelming forces of the Taira clan. Traditional military strategy suggested retreat or surrender, but Yoshitsune did something that his enemies never expected and that his own allies thought was madness. He entered what he called the state of empty fullness, a mental condition where his personal ego, fears, and emotional reactions completely disappeared, leaving behind only pure strategic intelligence and an almost supernatural ability to see the entire battlefield from a perspective that transcended normal human consciousness. In this state, Yoshitsune could perceive not just the physical positions of enemy forces, but the psychological states of individual commanders, the hidden fears and motivations driving their decisions, and the precise moments when their mental defenses would be weakest. This was not guesswork or intuition in the way we normally understand it. This was a systematic method for accessing a level of consciousness where the boundaries between self and environment dissolve, allowing for a type of strategic awareness that seems impossible from our normal, ego-driven perspective. The core of Yoshitsune's method, which I've studied and reconstructed from historical fragments and ancient texts, consists of what he called the 3 pillars of mental sovereignty. The first pillar is thought observation without attachment, which means learning to watch your own thoughts as if you were a neutral scientist observing someone else's mental processes. Most people are completely identified with their thoughts, believing that they are their thoughts, which means they have no control over the direction of their mental energy. Yoshitsune trained himself to maintain a constant awareness of his thinking process, while remaining emotionally detached from the content of his thoughts, creating a space between his true self and his mental activity that allowed him to choose which thoughts deserved his attention and which should be dismissed as mental noise. This is not meditation in the passive sense that most people understand it. This is an active, dynamic practice of mental sovereignty, where you become the director of your own consciousness rather than a victim of whatever random thoughts happen to arise in your mind. The second pillar is strategic emotional intelligence, which involves understanding that emotions are not random events that happen to you, but information systems that can be decoded and utilized for strategic advantage. Yoshitsune discovered that every emotion carries specific intelligence about your environment and your position within it. But most people are so overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotional reactions that they miss the valuable information their emotions are trying to convey. Fear, for example, is not just an unpleasant feeling to be avoided, but a sophisticated early warning system that alerts you to potential threats and opportunities for strategic positioning. Anger is not just destructive energy, but a signal that your boundaries are being violated and that decisive action may be required to restore proper order. By learning to decode the intelligence within emotional states, while maintaining enough detachment to avoid being overwhelmed by their intensity, Yoshitsune could access emotional information that gave him crucial insights into both his own strategic position and the psychological states of others around him. The third pillar, and perhaps the most powerful, is what Yoshitsune called invisible influence mastery, the ability to affect the thoughts and decisions of others without them being consciously aware that any influence is taking place. This is not about manipulation in the dark sense that we associate with that word today, but about understanding the fundamental principles of consciousness transmission and learning to operate from such a clear, centered state that others naturally align with your mental frequency. Yoshitsune discovered that when your own mind is completely clear and strategically focused, when you're operating from a place of genuine wisdom rather than ego-driven desires, your mental state becomes contagious in ways that bypass normal psychological defenses. People around you begin to think more clearly, make better decisions, and naturally orient themselves towards solutions that benefit everyone involved, not because you're forcing anything, but because clarity and wisdom have their own gravitational pull that draws people toward better thinking. Now, here's where this becomes practical for your daily life, because these principles are not just historical curiosities or abstract philosophical concepts. They're systematic mental technologies that you can implement immediately to transform your effectiveness in every area of your existence. In your personal life, the practice of thought observation without attachment means that you stop being the victim of your own mental chatter and emotional reactivity. Instead of spending your days being pulled in different directions by random thoughts about the past and anxieties about the future, you develop the ability to maintain a calm, clear center from which you can make decisions based on wisdom rather than impulse. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally cold or disconnected. It means developing the capacity to feel your emotions fully, while maintaining enough psychological space to respond rather than react, to choose your actions based on strategic thinking rather than being driven by whatever emotional state happens to be dominant at the moment. In your relationships, strategic emotional intelligence transforms how you navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, because you're no longer at the mercy of other people's emotional states or your own reactive patterns. When someone is angry with you, instead of automatically becoming defensive or counterattacking, you can decode the intelligence within their anger to understand what boundary has been violated or what need is not being met, allowing you to respond in a way that addresses the underlying issue rather than escalating the emotional conflict. When you're feeling frustrated or disappointed in a relationship, instead of either suppressing those feelings or exploding with them, you can use them as information about what adjustments need to be made in how you're relating to that person, leading to conversations that actually solve problems rather than just venting emotions. In your professional life, invisible influence mastery means that you become the kind of person that others naturally want to follow and collaborate with, not because you're using psychological techniques to manipulate them, but because your own mental clarity and strategic thinking creates an environment where everyone's intelligence is elevated. When you're in meetings, instead of getting caught up in ego battles and political maneuvering, you can maintain such a clear focus on finding solutions that others begin to align with that same solution-oriented mindset. When you're dealing with difficult clients or colleagues, instead of taking their behavior personally and responding from a place of defensiveness, you can maintain enough emotional detachment to see the underlying dynamics at play and respond in ways that diffuse tension while moving everyone toward productive outcomes. But here's what I need you to understand about why this method was suppressed and why it remains largely unknown even today. Systems of power, whether political, economic, or social, depend on keeping people in states of mental confusion, emotional reactivity, and psychological dependence. If you're constantly distracted by mental chatter, overwhelmed by emotional reactions, and looking to external authorities to tell you what to think and how to feel, you're much easier to control and manipulate than if you possess the kind of mental sovereignty that Yoshitsune's method develops. Advertising works by triggering emotional reactions that bypass your rational thinking processes. Political manipulation succeeds by keeping you focused on fear and anger, rather than clear strategic analysis. And social control operates by convincing you that you need external validation and approval rather than trusting your own inner wisdom and intelligence. The reason Yoshitsune's method was banned was not because it was dangerous in the sense of being harmful, but because it was dangerous to existing power structures that depended on keeping people mentally scattered and emotionally reactive. Imagine what would happen if everyone possessed the ability to observe their own thoughts without being controlled by them, to decode the intelligence within their emotions without being overwhelmed by their intensity, and to influence situations through clarity and wisdom, rather than force and manipulation. Such people would be impossible to control through the usual methods of fear, distraction, and emotional manipulation that have been used throughout history to maintain social and political hierarchies. This is why the development of mental sovereignty is not just a personal development goal, but a radical act of independence that threatens any system based on external control rather than inner wisdom. When you reclaim complete authority over your own consciousness, when you develop the ability to think clearly, regardless of external pressures and emotional turbulence, when you learn to influence situations through the power of wisdom, rather than the exercise of force, you become what Yoshitsune called a person of the way. Someone who operates from principles that transcend the normal patterns of human confusion and reactivity. I want you to understand that implementing this method is not about becoming perfect or never experiencing difficult emotions or challenging thoughts. It's about developing a fundamentally different relationship with your own consciousness, where you're the director, rather than the victim of your mental and emotional experience. This means that when difficult thoughts arise, instead of being overwhelmed by them or trying to suppress them, you observe them with the same neutral interest that a scientist might observe an interesting natural phenomenon. When intense emotions emerge, instead of being carried away by them or fighting against them, you allow them to flow through you while maintaining enough psychological space to extract whatever intelligence they're carrying about your situation and your strategic options. The practice begins with what Yoshitsune called the daily consciousness audit, a systematic review of your mental and emotional patterns that allows you to identify where you're giving away your mental sovereignty and where you're operating from reactive patterns rather than strategic choice. Every evening, spend 10 minutes reviewing the day and asking yourself these specific questions. At what moments did I feel like I was not in control of my thoughts and emotions? At what points did I react automatically rather than responding from a place of conscious choice? And where did I allow external circumstances or other people's behavior to determine my internal state, rather than maintaining my own center of mental clarity and emotional stability? This is not about judging yourself or trying to be perfect. It's about developing the self-awareness necessary to reclaim your mental sovereignty, step by step, moment by moment, until maintaining a clear, strategic consciousness becomes your natural way of being rather than something you have to force or struggle to achieve. Over time, this daily practice develops what Yoshitsune called the unshakable center, a place within your consciousness that remains calm, clear, and strategically focused, regardless of external chaos or internal turbulence. The next level of practice involves what he called emotional alchemy, the systematic transformation of reactive emotional energy into strategic intelligence and creative power. Instead of seeing difficult emotions like anger, fear, sadness, or frustration as problems to be solved, or enemies to be defeated, you learn to work with them as sources of information and energy that can be redirected toward achieving your deepest goals and values. This requires developing the capacity to feel your emotions fully without being overwhelmed by their intensity, to extract the intelligence they carry about your situation without being driven to immediate action by their urgency, and to redirect their energy toward strategic thinking and wise action, rather than reactive behavior that often creates more problems than it solves. The most advanced level of Yoshitsune's method involves what he called consciousness transmission, the ability to influence situations and people through the quality of your own mental state, rather than through force, manipulation, or persuasion in the conventional sense. This is based on the understanding that consciousness is fundamentally interconnected, that your mental and emotional state affects the mental and emotional states of everyone around you in ways that operate below the threshold of normal awareness. When you're operating from a place of genuine clarity, wisdom, and strategic intelligence, when your own consciousness is free from the usual patterns of confusion, reactivity, and ego-driven desire, that clarity becomes contagious and begins to influence the thinking and decision-making of others in your environment. This is not about imposing your will on others or trying to control their behavior, but about creating such a strong field of clear, strategic consciousness that others naturally begin to think more clearly and make better decisions when they're in your presence. It's the difference between trying to push a river in the direction you want it to flow and removing the obstacles that prevent the river from following its natural course toward the ocean. Now, I want to share with you something that most people will never hear because it challenges some of our deepest assumptions about success, achievement, and personal power. The greatest obstacle to developing the kind of mental sovereignty that Yoshitsune possessed is not lack of technique or insufficient knowledge, but attachment to the ego's need to feel important, special, and in control in ways that actually prevent true effectiveness and wisdom. Most of what we call ambition and drive is actually a form of mental agitation that creates the very confusion and reactivity that blocks access to the clear, strategic consciousness that produces real results in the world. Yoshitsune discovered that the more you try to force outcomes through willpower and ego-driven effort, the more you interfere with the natural intelligence that knows exactly what needs to be done and how to do it most efficiently. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of his method for modern people to understand because we've been conditioned to believe that success requires constant effort, strategic planning, and the ability to impose our will on resistant circumstances. But Yoshitsune's approach is based on the recognition that there's a level of intelligence beyond the ego mind that operates with far greater efficiency and effectiveness than anything the personal will can accomplish through force. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up your goals and ambitions. It means learning to align your personal will with the deeper intelligence that sees the whole picture, rather than just the narrow perspective of what the ego thinks it wants and needs. When you operate from this aligned state, action becomes effortless rather than forced. Decisions emerge from clarity rather than confusion, and you find yourself accomplishing more with less stress and struggle than you ever thought possible. The key to accessing this deeper intelligence is what Yoshitsune called surrendering to win, the willingness to let go of the ego's need to control outcomes while maintaining complete commitment to wise action and strategic thinking. This is not surrender in the sense of giving up or becoming passive, but surrender in the sense of aligning your personal energy with the natural flow of intelligence and effectiveness, rather than trying to force results through willpower alone. As we bring this exploration to a close, I want to make sure you understand that everything I've shared with you tonight is not just theoretical knowledge to be admired from a distance, but practical wisdom that begins to transform your life the moment you start implementing it, even in small ways. The path to mental sovereignty is not about making dramatic changes all at once, but about making consistent, intelligent choices that gradually shift your relationship with your own consciousness from victim to director, from reactive to strategic, from confused to clear. This journey requires courage because it means taking complete responsibility for your mental and emotional state, regardless of external circumstances. And it requires patience because the deepest transformations in consciousness happen gradually, as new patterns of thinking and feeling become more natural than the old patterns of confusion and reactivity. But the rewards of this journey are beyond anything you can imagine from your current perspective, because when you develop true mental sovereignty, when you learn to operate from the kind of clear, strategic consciousness that Yoshitsune possessed, your entire life becomes an expression of wisdom and effectiveness that serves not only your own deepest goals, but the highest good of everyone whose life you touch. If what you've heard tonight resonates with something deep within you, if you recognize that you've been living as a passenger in your own mind rather than the driver of your destiny, then I want you to take action right now that will begin your transformation immediately. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because I'm dedicated to sharing the deepest wisdom from history's greatest strategic minds, wisdom that has been hidden, suppressed, or forgotten, but that contains the keys to developing the kind of mental clarity and effectiveness that will transform every area of your life. This is not entertainment or casual content. This is practical wisdom that will challenge you to become the kind of person you were meant to be before the world convinced you to settle for confusion, reactivity, and dependence on external circumstances for your happiness and success. In the comments below, let me know which aspect of Yoshitsune's method speaks most directly to your current situation, and what you're committed to implementing first in your journey toward complete mental sovereignty. Because your comment will not only help you clarify your own intention, but will inspire others who are ready to reclaim their mental freedom and begin living from a place of wisdom rather than confusion.